Wars 3 3/4 was popular again. And in fact, it was so popular they were writing songs about it. Okay, maybe they weren't, but there are songs about being popular. And total tangent here, but the woman playing Elphaba there from Wicked, where they sing the song Popular, that was my friend Nicole Parker, who I went to high school with. So no wonder I was so intimidated trying out for the school musicals, because we had a Broadway caliber star in our theater class. And I'm totally on a tangent here. Where was I? I was talking about popular. And yes, okay, so Star Wars figures are getting really, really popular at this time again. Power of the Force 2 had been cranking along. It had been a good 2 years. And one of the ways Hasbro wanted to make it easier for retails was dividing them into collections. And they did this with a stripe that ran across the bottom: yellow, red, and blue, collection 1, 2, and 3. Now this was done partially to help the stock boys stock the product. See this video here about the rationale for packaging and how it's actually for stock boys, girls, men, women, not just collectors. But because of this, it kind of created a weird backlash where one of the collections, specifically the yellow, became such a peg warmer that it actually hung around for 10 years. People were finding figures in the yellow collection for a decade after they shipped, and it screwed up all kinds of things. For example, this wave, the first wave of yellow, not only did it include figures from the classic movie, which we'll get to, but it also included some expanded universe figures. Besides the Shadows of the Empire figures, this was the first time that Kenner had done figures from the comics and the novels and other media. And there was main characters like Luke. It was brand new characters like Grand Admiral Thrawn, which I was especially excited to get because I'm a big fan of the Timothy Zahn novels, having, rediscovered Star Wars in the 90s. So it was cool to get these characters. But the issue was, because they shipped in the yellow collection, and because the yellow collection characters were less desired, shall we say, that they became peg warmers for 10 years, it gave the message to Hasbro that fans didn't want expanded universe figures. But it wasn't the expanded universe figures in the yellow collection that were peg warmers. It was the original trilogy figures. So because these figures ship with unpopular original trilogy figures, Hasbro kind of put a stop to all expanded universe figures for like a decade or more. And ironically, two of the figures, the Space Trooper and the Dark Trooper, were actually so popular that they were reissued. The Space Trooper with a brand new sculpt, and the Dark Trooper was actually reissued just with a new paint job in the 30th anniversary line, 10, 15 years later? So, yeah, crazy. After sort of thinking that these figures weren't popular, they became more popular than ever. So, hey, what are you going to say? They were stuck with some original trilogy figures that weren't as popular. And as an original trilogy purist, yes, come on, please keep scrolling up. We all want Sebastian Shaw. There we go. That's the way it's supposed to look. So, as an original trilogy purist, let's jump into the original trilogy figures that are shipping in this wave. So first up, we have Nien Numb. I always called him Nien Numb, but it's Nine, like nine. So he was one of the odder aliens from the original trilogy and from Return of the Jedi, but he became a really popular figure and a really popular character with fans, probably because he got to be co-pilot of the Millennium Falcon. I mean, only Chewbacca has had that honor. But, he just looks awesome, and, I'm sure there were people that just collected Nien Numb action figures. I mean, not me. I had one as a kid. That was enough. But, hey, getting to co-pilot the Millennium Falcon with Lando Calrissian, that's, pretty cool. Although he did laugh when the radar dish gets smashed off. What a jerk. So he was played by Richard Bonehill, who still does a lot of fan signings and convention work. Really proud that he had a significant part in the original trilogy. And Nien Numb shows up in the sequel trilogy in the same outfit. So I guess he never does his laundry or never goes shopping. I don't know. Do all Celestians dress like that? Is that a thing? Which, yes, that's his species, Celeste. Which is interesting because it's one of the planets that gets name dropped into the original trilogy, and almost everyone misses it.
What of the reports of the rebel fleet massing near Sullust?
So, yep, Sullust. That's where the Rebel fleet is hanging out before they go attack the Death Star. So, yep, that's Nien Numb's, Nien Numb's, Nien Numb's planet. All right, speaking of his species, that is not Nien Numb in the Home 1 briefing scene, nor is that Nien Numb on Endor, the Celestian we see giving a big hug to Wedge Antilles during the Ewok celebration. So that is 10 Numb.
He's my brother.
Yep, he's Nien Numb's brother, 10 Numb. So does that mean like they have another brother named 11 Numb or 8 Numb? I don't know. I guess that's how the Celestians name their kids. So he's the other Celestian, that's the species from Sullust, that we see in the movie. And I mean, it goes back to the the 80s. There were Topps cards that classified him or named him as 10 Numb. While he showed up in all of this off-screen photography in a white outfit and as figures, in the movie he's wearing red. So this figure that came out as Nien Numb is actually 10 Numb. Nien Numb never wears a B-Wing outfit, only 10 Numb. So it's weird because we have action figures of 10 Numb in white and an action figure of 10 Numb in red labeled Nien Numb. It's confusing. We'll get to that when we get to this figure. But as far as Nien Numb goes, we've only had 2 figures of him. We've had the original one and the Vintage Collection update that came out as kind of the peak of the Vintage Collection. And this was definitely one of the best figures, if not in the Vintage Collection, in the entire Hasbro lineup. So while we had our Power of the Force 2 one for years and years, it wasn't until the Vintage Collection that we actually got a legitimate update. Because, 10 Numb is not 9 Numb. Moving on from aliens to humans, and when we're doing humans, well, it's time to do a fat, bald, crying man, because that's what all kids want to play with when it comes to Star Wars, right? They want a fat, bald, crying man with a hairy chest. Well, what are you going to do? It's the Rancor Keeper, or Malakili, there we go. The only character that cries in Star Wars. Well, does Anakin cry in the prequels? I don't know. But in the original trilogy, he's the only one that cries. He had a vintage figure, and while the figure was, again, it's an overweight, bald guy with a, rug on his head, or a towel on his head or something. I mean, maybe, he's following the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he's carrying a towel, but he did have the coolest accessory of any figure, if you consider the Rancor his accessory, which I do, even though it was sold separately. And in the modern line, we also got a Rancor sold separately that came out in the second wave of Beast packs, when we got oversized Beast, the Rancor and the Bantha, which, again, we'll get to those in time when we get to the included figures, since this is going to be figure by figure in release order. Obviously, we would get more Rancors in the line that Hasbro and Kenner would continue to pump out, from super cute ones from the Action Fleet to expanded universe versions of the Rancor where he's got, tattoos or battle marks or, something. I'm not really sure. I never played the video game this is based on. But I wonder why he's called Battle Rancor. I mean, is that his title? Or is that, his classification? Is it, Battle Toads? I don't know. But, I mean, all Rancors are Battle Rancors, right? I mean, are there Rancors that sit around drinking tea and, being nice and watering the flowers? Well, as much as the original Power of the Force 2 Malakili Rancor Keeper was a huge peg warmer. He was one of those ones I mentioned in the beginning of this video that just hung around forever. Eventually, Kenner Hasbro did redo him again, and they did him justice. He got a lot of articulation. He got a removable towel. Now you can take the towel off his head and see his bald head in full, just like the vintage figure. So the Power of the Force 2 one didn't have a removable towel. But hey, you gotta have a towel. Everyone always needs a towel. More Hitchhiker references, right? So, hey, if you want to collect bald, crying, fat men with hairy chests, this is the figure for you. Next up in this wave is another one of our peg warmers, EV-9D9. So, EV-99 is one of Jabba the Hutt's droids, and it's one of the rare figures that we've never gotten an update to since Power of the Force 2. There was a vintage figure of 99, but since then, nothing. And I'm a big collector of droids. It's one of my favorite sort of subsets of Star Wars. This is one of my many droid shelves in my office. And, I just think droid pools look really cool when they're all standing around. And in the vintage line, we did get some droids, but we didn't get a ton of them, and we did get EV-99, of course, but it wasn't a huge category the way we got lots of droids in the modern line. But the vintage figure of EV-99, it's one of those few figures that I will say is better than the modern counterpart, at least the Power of the Force 2 counterpart. While the proportions are pretty much the same and the deco's pretty much the same, the vintage figure does have one thing that the modern figure does not. Well, actually, the modern figure has one thing that the vintage figure doesn't, which is his own desk, because, droid action figures with their own desks are awesome. But the vintage figure had a articulated mouth, and I think anytime a figure has an articulated mouth, it wins. So this is still the best EV-99 figure, or 9D9 figure we've gotten. He was repackaged with Jabba the Hutt's dungeon, aka his torture chamber, which was just a repaint of the Land of the Jawas set, or the Jawa Build-A-Droid playset. And of the 92 figures from the original line, he's never been redone since Power of the Force 2, much like his buddy who actually tortured the droids. 99 just did he ran it, but EV-88 did the actual torturing, which makes you kind of ask the question, can a droid feel pain? I mean, they're definitely torturing them and pulling them apart, and you kind of hear some squeals from the gonk droid and the translator droid, but I don't know. I don't know if droids can feel pain. So, there we go. We have our Jabba torture droids who sat on the shelf forever and prevented us from getting another one. Alright, wrapping up this wave, we have to talk about the Yak. Yak Face himself, Salak Murray. Well, Yak Face, as he was known in the vintage line, is a gem, a diamond for many collectors in their vintage collection because he was only released in Canada and overseas in Europe. He was never released in the US, and that happens a lot with toy lines. It happened with Masters of the Universe, with the dinosaurs and the giants, Titus and Megator. And that's because the European and Canadian market is usually about 2 years behind the US market. So, as Star Wars figures were less popular in the US, they remained popular in other markets. So having Yak Face, or Salak Murray, as he's, that's Hammerhead versus Moma Nadone, Pundababa, Walrus Man kind of thing, and having one in Power of the Force 2 meant we could finally have a Yak Face. Everyone could get one because you just could not get the vintage one. And he is in the movie. I mean, it is kind of one of those blink and you miss him things. He's hanging out on the sail barge. I don't know if you see him in Jabba's palace. I could be wrong, but I couldn't find any shots. You may also know him from a lot of the publicity images you've done for Return of the Jedi, where he's hanging out with other aliens from Jabba's palace, showing the breadth of cool new aliens we were going to meet, as well as from the On the Sail Barge trading card from the top set, which links him to the sail barge and is all the more reason why it was cool that he was included with the Vintage Collection HasLab sail barge playset / dollhouse when it came out as a crowdfunding object or toy. So the version that came with the sail barge came on a vintage Power of the Force card, but the version then was released in stores on a regular standard vintage card, which actually never existed because the vintage figure was only released on the tri-local card. Well, could I be wrong? Was he on a single card? I'm pretty sure it was only tri-local. I could be wrong. I've been wrong a lot. And there are slight differences. There's actually two versions with actually both, the sail barge and the regular with a reflective and matte coin version, but we'll get more into that once we get to this figure in a couple of years. So for those of you who are Jabba's Palace people, and this is my Jabba's Palace diorama in my office, I'm also a big Jabba's the Palace. There we go. I can't talk today. Or if you're just a Yak Face fan and like collecting all things Yak Face, hey, this was the figure for you because it was great to finally have one we could afford after years and years of only having Lego figures or the Lego figure came after. What am I saying? But the point is, Yak Face is awesome, and I have no idea what I'm talking about.